talked about that shell shock, kind of the stereotype of trauma, which I also held for a long time. Like, oh, it's war, it's a car accident, it's something more extreme.
Hmm. Hmm.
But are there other types of trauma that could shrink our window that we may not think about or
Yeah,
identify with?
yeah. Um, so I've learned there's all different kinds of trauma, and I can check off a lot of the boxes.
Mm.
Um, there is even starting with like ancestral trauma. So some people will say that what you're like 2 generations before you experienced is also affecting your nervous system. So if
Oh.
your grandparents were in like the Holocaust, like
Mhm.
when you're born, your system might already be more sensitive to certain things or
Yeah.
have less resiliency to stress. Um, Also events around your birth, even while you're in your mother's womb. Those things can affect your nervous system. A big piece of the work I do is around that really early developmental trauma, like things that happen in the first 3 years of your life.
Mm.
And that's particularly important because that is when your nervous system and your brain and your immune system and all of these things are forming. And so what we often see is that people who had ruptures in those earliest years of their life aren't getting like a solid foundation of their nervous system to begin with.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're not on steady ground, so your window of tolerance might be immediately smaller,
Hmm.
potentially. And I think it's an important reminder that we are impacted by the nervous systems of the generations before us. Because
Hmm.
let's say you're inside of your mother's womb, you're taking on her nervous system, but then your mother was impacted by your grandmother, and so on, and just then
Hmm.
how the interactions, there's so much shaping that happens
Hmm.
even before you're born.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to see if you have anything else to share before I ask you another question about this.
Um, yeah, I was just kind of soaking in what you just said of, yeah, even just the stuff from generations prior. But then I was also thinking about as your parents are raising you,
Yes.
it's through their nervous systems that your system's learning how to regulate. So we co-regulate before we can self-regulate. And so if your parents never had experiences of really attuned co-regulation when they were children, it's like likely then you're not going to get it. So it passes down that way
Right.
too.
Right. I don't think people realize, just seeing sometimes folks say like, "Oh, let your kid cry it out," or they'll take care of themselves. I'm like, no, they need your nervous system. They need to borrow your regulation or to learn how to regulate through you. I don't think
Hmm.
a lot of folks really understand that.
Yeah, yeah.
And
No,
I think,
exactly what you just said.
yeah, and that can cause quite a ripple effect throughout your
Hmm.
life.
Hmm. Yeah, the image I kind of like is if those earliest years, if you're building like a house, it's like the foundation of the house. You want a strong foundation, and then everything you build on top of that, all your brain development, the development of your personality, and all of that
Mm.
is going to build on top of that. Um, And then also, when we experience traumas later in life, how well you respond to those traumas will be based on that kind of baseline nervous system regulation you have.
Right.
I've heard a number of teachers say if you experience like shock trauma later in life and don't recover that quickly from it, it's probably because you had those earlier ruptures.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Where if someone did have that baseline regulation, if they experience a trauma, they might be able to like do a few somatic therapy sessions or process it with their family and kind of move through it kind of quickly. But if you had those earlier ruptures, it's going to take you a lot longer to heal from those later shock traumas.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense. It sounds like it could be cumulative over the
Hmm.
lifespan,
Yeah.
and perhaps could indicate why maybe your window of tolerance seems smaller, but you can't think of a trauma you've personally experienced. It it could be because you've inherited something through the lineage
Yes.
of your family, or there was some type of misattunement or dysregulation happening with your parent relation or
Hmm.
caregiver
Hmm.
relationship. It seems like there's so many subtle or sneaky ways this could impact you.
Hmm. There's also a big category of trauma around medical trauma. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you had hospitalizations when you were really young or even older, and I think a lot of people don't think of that category as often. There's also what we call social trauma, which is, for any people who's part of a minority group, whether you're a woman, probably if you're a sensitive person, if because of, like gender identity, if you're queer, if you're poor, because of your race, because of your religion, all of those little discriminations you experience on a daily basis lead your body to feel like there's a threat present. So social trauma is also something that maybe people don't realize because it's not one big event. It's something really subtle that's happening over time.
Right, where you have to learn to be hyper vigilant at a certain
Mm-hmm.
level.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that
Yeah.
really would degrade your sense of safety over time.
Mm-hmm.